From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
House Speaker Mike Johnson gets a reality check from his own conference, casting doubt on whether or not a budget resolution vote will take place this evening, thanks to pushback over spending cuts. We'll get a reality check from Republican Congressman Bryan Steil of Wisconsin and Greg Murphy of North Carolina.
And we'll talk with Betsey Stevenson from the University of Michigan for more on the budget battle as consumer confidence sinks by the most since 2021.
Plus, Ukraine has agreed with the U.S. on terms for a minerals deal. We'll bring you the details with analysis from our political panel.
Thanks for being with us on the Tuesday edition, the late edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. House Speaker Mike Johnson says the House is moving toward a floor vote on a budget resolution as soon as tonight after the plan passed the Rules Committee along party lines earlier today.
We're working right now to get everybody on board. I think everybody wants to be on this train and not in front of it. And so we're going to answer the remaining questions and get everybody on board, and we're going to deliver on that mandate that we told the American people that we would do.
And with only one vote to spare, the Speaker and his team have their work cut out for them as we turn to a floor vote, trying to convince several holdouts within their own party. And joining us now with more live from Capitol Hill is Republican Congressman Bryan Steil of Wisconsin. Congressman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. What's the state of play here? Does Mike Johnson have the votes?
We need to have all of the votes because this is our opportunity really for a procedural step to really unlock our ability to deliver on American First agenda. It's difficult always on getting all the frogs in the wheelbarrow and getting it across the line or getting everyone on the train, as Speaker Johnson said. But I'm optimistic that by the end of the day, we'll be able to do that. Easier said than done. But it's absolutely essential if we want to go forward, secure the border, control spending, and make sure that we're preserving the important President Trump tax cuts.
Well, even if this successfully passes on the floor of the House, and that is still an if as we speak, Congressman, it still will have to be reconciled with the Senate, which obviously has pursued a different strategy and would like to see the 2017 tax cuts made permanent, not just extended. This bill does not allow for permanency. Will it need to be changed?
Well, I think we have a lot of opportunities here. At the end of the day, the Senate and the House are going to have to come together, as you noted. I think it would be important to make sure that we have those tax cuts as permanent. It allows businesses and investors and workers to be able to rely with confidence that we're going to have an economy that's in a position to grow. That said, I think moving forward with this step today in the House, making sure that we're doing a lot to control the spending side of the ledger to prevent the inflation that we saw under 4 years of Biden's reckless spending is essential. I'm optimistic we're going to pass the House bill later today.
We've got a live view of the House floor for those of you with us on YouTube and Bloomberg TV. You just answered my next question, Congressman. It does, in fact, sound like you do expect a vote to happen tonight. There is word that Donald Trump has started picking up the phone. Will he be the one to make the difference on the last few fence sitters in the Republican conference?
Well, it's going to be a combined effort. That's great news if that's the case, because I think at the end of the day, all of us are united in delivering on the American First agenda. To my colleagues on the right that say the reduction in spending is insufficient, I remind them that by passing this procedural vote today, it's simply a floor that we can build on the spending and saving reforms. To my colleagues that think it's too much, I would offer them to really look hard and make sure that we're not simply measuring the inputs into some of our key programs, in particular Medicaid, but instead we're measuring the outputs, that we're putting forward policies that are lifting people out of poverty and allowing them to become self-sustainable through better and higher paying jobs. And we can do that if we move forward with this agenda.
Well, there's also a question, of course, ultimately, and that's what a lot of the dispute within your conference comes down to, is the price tag and the offsets. And we spoke with Maya McGinnis, president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, last night, Congressman. This is what she had to tell us about this plan.
We can also scale back the price tag of this tax cut. $4.5 trillion, $5 trillion. This makes no sense given our fiscal situation right now. If we want to extend these tax cuts, we should extend the ones that are most pro-growth, most important, and offset a lot of them by broadening the tax base. There's $85 trillion in spending over 10 years. They're cutting $2 trillion out of that. This is not taking a sledgehammer to the government. It's a very small amount.
What's your response to that?
Well, I think there's two key important points. So one, this just sets forward the framework with which we can utilize to make sure that we are extending the most important tax cuts and making sure that we're doing R&D tax credit and accelerated depreciation. Pro-growth tax policies is essential. I think it's important to remember when those policies were first put in place, the United States actually saw an increase in total tax revenue because if we're growing the economy, we can grow tax revenue without increasing rates. The second piece of the puzzle is it is essential that we are reducing the reckless spending that we've seen here in Washington. The proposed number that is in the budget reconciliation bill, again, is simply a floor. Additional savings are able to be found through the legislative process and committees here in the House and hopefully in the Senate as well are going to get hard to work as soon as this reconciliation budget passes.
We could talk about this budget resolution, the reconciliation plan all day long, Congressman, without reminding our audience the fact that the government runs out of money in 17 days, and that's a completely separate process. Is the Republican conference prepared to offer a continuing resolution to keep that from happening? Because we've had more folks come on the air in the last 2 days to tell us, no, this is the real one. This is going to be the shutdown based on everything else that's happening right now in the political climate. What's your take?
We are best served if we keep the federal government open. Shutting the government down rarely serves anyone well. That said, the spending process for discretionary spending in Washington, D.C. has been absolutely broken for generations. This should be an opportunity where we reflect and we revise the entire spending process here in our nation's capital. I think everyone who pays attention to Washington, D.C. is absolutely sick and tired of the discretionary spending process. Let's rip the whole thing open and get it fixed. That said, as we approach this March deadline in just a few weeks, we would be best served to keep the government open. I'd rather pass the spending bills and drive forward with a President Trump-signed legislation. But our worst-case scenario would be closing the federal government. It's unproductive, doesn't help anyone. It would be far better served with a CR in that case, although I wouldn't like to do that.
Well, and I'm sure there are plenty of federal employees out there who are wondering if they'll get furloughed if they've been lucky enough to hold on to their jobs in the last few weeks. Congressman, I do wonder, and you have thousands of federal workers in your district, I believe just shy of 7,000, what you're hearing from your constituents about the work of the DOGE so far in the reduction in the federal government, not necessarily the idea of doing so, but the manner with which this is being done.
What I hear from folks is a frustration with the level of communication that's coming out of Washington, D.C. as it relates to the changes that are taking place. But I hear less frustration, as I think you noted, about actually digging in and removing the waste, fraud, and abuse that does exist at the federal government. And so I think people are very supportive of the overall effort. I think people are looking, when I hear from folks at home, for a little more communication as to exactly what is taking place. And as we provide that information, as the administration comes forward with that information, I think what we'll actually see at the end of the day is that people are supportive and positive of actually shaking things up here in Washington, D.C., all in an effort to get spending under control.
Your colleague from Oklahoma, Kevin Hearn, had a conversation with NBC News, said his constituents in his district are not interested in fighting the budget cuts. They like this idea of cutting spending, Congressman. He says, quote, it's just that they don't like Elon, unquote. Did you get an earful about the DOGE at town hall meetings while you were home in your district?
As I was meeting with constituents across southeast Wisconsin last week, I do believe there's a better opportunity to work and improve the communication that's coming out of Washington, D.C. and making it back home. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of confusion for folks. But as we deliver that message and explain to people what's actually occurring here in Washington, I think at the end of the day is that Kevin Hearn is correct, that people are looking to remove waste, fraud, and abuse, find efficiencies in our federal government, things that employers and businesses do every day in the private sector. We need to take some of those lessons learned and apply them here on the federal government side.
All right, Republican Congressman Bryan Steil of Wisconsin, live from Capitol Hill with us this evening. Thank you. And coming up, consumer confidence drops by the most since 2021 amid uncertainty over the Trump administration's policies, and the bond market is taking note. We'll have more with Betsey Stevenson of the University of Michigan next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's not optional for us to reduce the federal expenses. It's essential. It's essential for America to remain solvent as a country, and it's essential for America to have the resources necessary to provide things to its citizens and not simply be servicing vast amounts of debt.
Elon Musk earlier this month in the Oval Office on his and the DOGE's work to cut government spending and curb the national debt. And he thinks the bond market, which is signaling wariness about that effort, should be giving him more credit. He said during a live discussion on X a few weeks ago, quote, "The bond markets do not currently reflect the savings that I'm confident we can achieve. If you're shorting bonds, I think you're on the wrong side of the bet." End quote. It's all covered in the latest Big Take, and it's co-authored by Bloomberg's Enda Curran, who is here with us now in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Enda, take concern over the fiscal situation, layer on perhaps some of the economic data we're getting around consumer confidence, and what does it paint for the bond market?
Well, so right now we're getting big headlines on fiscal cuts, on spending cuts. Elon Musk has spoke about $2 trillion, then it came back to $1 trillion. The latest figure from DOGE is maybe 55-odd billion, so it's dramatic announcements. But the bond market is yet to be convinced. The movement in yield isn't quite matching the headlines coming out of DOGE, for example. Yields are in something of a range. The 10-year yield, 4.3, 4.7%. And the downward movement in recent weeks could equally be attributed to softening data that you mentioned, like consumer confidence, for example, as much as anything else. So a little bit of disconnect, big headlines on spending cuts, but bond markets aren't yet necessarily reacting the way you might think they would to those kind of announcements.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said we don't need to yell at the Fed to cut interest rates. We're going to watch Treasury yields sink. We're watching the 10-year note. Isn't this going as planned?
Quite right. And in fact, I was at an event today where Treasury Secretary Bessent made the same point. They're watching the 10-year very closely. Mm-hmm. The yield is coming down, but this is where you get into the weeds of what's driving it. It's coinciding with softening data. For example, you mentioned the consumer confidence weakening today, the biggest downward move since August 2021. There are signs that business confidence is softening a touch, signs that labour market is softening. So therefore, yields are coming down, at least reflecting that. Yeah. The kick or the dividend from these so-called spending and saving cuts isn't necessarily being seen yet, but it might come in the bond market in the weeks and months ahead.
Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about softening data at the very same time that the CEO of Bank of America, Brian Moynihan, told David Rubenstein, the host of Bloomberg's Peer-to-Peer today, that he doesn't think the Fed's going to be cutting anymore this year. This is what he said.
Inflation is coming down, but is a bigger fight. And in the end of the day, there's the dual mandate, employment, inflation. Employment, they're in great shape on. Inflation, it's been coming down, it's working its way down. It takes multiple years to squeeze inflation out. Our expectation is they won't cut rates. I think we have
for the whole rest of the year.
Yeah, for the rest of the year and into next year, and frankly.
So is it, Enda, that monetary policymakers are less likely to be concerned about a softening in sentiment as they are, that sentiment also reflects a pickup in inflation expectation?
Yeah, there's no doubt that the surveys among consumers are showing they're worried about inflation. Consumer confidence today across all age groups, across all income brackets, making the point they're worried about the jobs market and inflation, where it's going. And one of the big headlines around inflation expectations at the moment is tariffs, and the idea that there might be more tariffs going on goods coming into the US from countries all around the world, and that is causing angst among small business people and consumers. Now, of course, the administration says short-term pain, longer-term gain for the economy, but right here, right now, it's clearly a source of worry.
All right, Enda, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Enda Curran, great to have you with us here. Find the Big Take on the terminal and online as we now add the voice of Betsey Stevenson, professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan, former chief economist for the Department of Labor. Hey, Betsey, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg. What's your take on this? I know you were listening to our conversation with Enda. What is the bond market telling us?
Well, I think what it's telling us right now is that it's actually worrying about the economy softening a little bit. I don't think it's telling us anything about any kind of savings that we're getting from DOGE. I mean, right now the estimates are that maybe DOGE has saved us somewhere between $1 and $7 trillion. They're claiming $55 trillion, but when you add up the numbers on their website, you get 7.3, or sorry, I said trillion, I meant billion. And you know what? These billions, trillions numbers are so hard for people to wrap their heads around. The best thing to do is put them into what it means per person. And roughly, so far, DOGE has saved us each maybe 1 or 2 cups of coffee per person. That's sort of where we're at. And when we've been saved a cup of coffee, I don't think you're really going to see that in the bond market. And if I was the bond market, I'd be thinking a lot more about not the billions being saved by Musk in cutting federal employment, but I'd be thinking about the trillions of debt that Congress is contemplating through tax cuts at the end of this year. So I think in terms of government borrowing, we're still on growth and borrowing trajectory. And if the bond market's probably laser focused on where the economy's going and where interest rates are going.
Well, as we talk about the deficit and potentially the deficit being inflated by tax cuts, Betsey, Republicans would argue that actually the bigger economic thing we have to consider is what will happen at the end of the year if the 2017 tax cuts are allowed to expire. What's your answer to that?
Well, this is one of the reasons why, for the last several decades, we've gotten into this game where we do short-term tax cuts that then expire. It's the way we can get it through without seeing the explosive growth in the debt if they were being made permanent. But then when we get to the expiration point, everybody argues, oh, no, we can't go back to the way things were. That would be terrible for the economy. If you're worried about government borrowing, you cannot have a solution that only comes through cuts. What we've got right now is, I would basically call it a performance art piece of cuts by Musk. These numbers are small. They're firing people who were providing value. They're largely firing the youngest people because they're firing all these probationary people. The youngest people tend to be our most productive, least costly people. So we're probably making the government more inefficient, but there's a lot of spectacle about it, which is why I call it performance art. And that's all supposed to dazzle us and have us look away from trillions of dollars in tax cuts to the uber wealthy.
Well, are we going to be dazzled by the jobs report in a couple of months? Are these numbers going to show up? Betsey, I've heard you refer to the reference date and sort of the creative timing of some of these cuts, but they're starting to add up to the point now where I'm assuming you can't avoid them.
We're not going to see it on Friday because the reference week was the week of the 12th. We didn't see a lot of cuts then. Again, they're laying off a lot of young people. I think those people are going to find work. So I don't know whether it's going to show up in the jobs number. I think it's, we're looking for that mechanical thing, which is, we're laying off a bunch of people. Is it going to show up in unemployment rates? Hopefully not. These people are going to find new jobs. But you know how it might show up is everybody out there should be pretty nervous that they could lose their job. And if you're nervous you can lose your job, what's the best advice for you as a person to do? Build your nest egg. Be prepared for job loss. Cut your spending now. That's individually optimal. But if we all go out there and cut our spending, even by just a little bit, 4, 5, 6%, that's going to lead to a pretty big downturn.
Finally, Betsey, 1 week from this evening, according to the president, we could see, after a delay, the imposition of 25% tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico. This gets back into the inflation expectations idea we were just discussing. But how quickly would you expect that to show up in economic data if it goes through?
I think it's already showing up in economic data, so I think it'll be quite quick if it goes through. I think people have already started adjusting their behavior because there is a probabilistic increase coming. And I think when the real increase comes, they'll increase their data, their behavior all the way through. And I think we'll see it happen quite quickly. And there's going to be certain states, like the state of Michigan that I'm in, that's going to get really hammered by that. And what's unfortunate is a lot of these people that are going to get hurt were really strong Trump supporters. So I'm hoping he's going to think about what his constituents, not just even the whole public that he does represent, but the people who are most loyal to him, what are they going to do when they're facing 25% price increases and job loss in important sectors like the auto industry?
All right, Betsey Stevenson, professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan and former chief economist for the Department of Labor. Thank you. Coming up, Ukraine reportedly agreed to the terms of a minerals deal with the U.S., which the White House views as a step toward reaching a ceasefire with Russia. We'll bring you the details next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I will just reiterate his position. It's critical that this deal is signed. He expects President Zelensky to sign a deal. This is to recoup American tax dollars that have been funding Ukraine's national defense.
That's the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt speaking earlier today. As Bloomberg News reports, a deal has been reached with Ukraine on an economic cooperation agreement, a minerals deal. President Trump says it's pivotal for ending the war. Let's get details from Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Joe. Bloomberg News reporting Ukraine has agreed on a deal to jointly develop its natural resources. That's according to people familiar with the matter. The framework looks to create a joint U.S.-Ukraine fund, which would manage future revenue from critical minerals, oil, and gas. Importantly, this latest agreement does not specify security guarantees, something Ukraine had been looking for. The White House press secretary, as you just heard, reiterated the president's position earlier. Now, the Trump administration says that the guarantees would be implicit, since the U.S. would have a vested economic interest in the country. Zelensky asserts the conditions for the aid that was negotiated under the last administration does not amount to a debt that needs to be repaid. The U.S. Congress has appropriated $174 billion in security assistance in the 3 years since Russia invaded. State Department data shows us that $84 billion of that has been dispersed so far. Those numbers run a little more even to what we've been hearing from Zelensky versus the White House. Now, Ukraine wants to invest in this new fund with the U.S. on a 50-50 basis. The country has critical mineral reserves such as titanium, but when we look at the map, no real major rare earth mineral reserves that have been recognized as being economically viable. There's still more negotiations to be had. Person familiar says Ukraine sees this just as a starting point and that they are looking to obtain those security guarantees moving forward, something that Zelensky has repeatedly said has been left out both in this iteration of the deals but also in years prior. Joe and Kaylee, it will be a focus after we learned that President Trump is expecting Zelensky at the White House on Friday.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. Great reporting. Thank you so much. It's going to be, of course, a lot of visits this week. It was Macron yesterday. Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, going to be here on Thursday and could ultimately culminate with Zelensky visiting on Friday, though the president didn't seem totally firm on those details.
He said if he wants to, and I think he does. So we'll assume that that's an invitation for Friday.
And if we get actual confirmation, of course, we will let you know, just as we'll keep you updated on what's happening in the House of Representatives. It is still set to vote on its budget resolution this evening, at least for now. And we'll have a live update with Republican Congressman Greg Murphy of North Carolina next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Everybody is committed to preserving Medicare benefits for those who desperately need it and deserve it and qualify for it. What we're talking about is rooting out the fraud, waste, and abuse. What you're doing with that is you're shoring up the program, and you're making sure that the people who rely upon that have it, and that it's a better program. That's what we're talking about.
The reckless Republican budget will hurt everyday Americans who rely on Medicaid, rely on nutritional assistance, and rely on veterans' benefits.
We have to make sure that leadership includes those of us who have large Medicaid populations in that process from the very beginning. We need to be in the room as this legislation is crafted.
This absolutely guarantees Medicaid cuts that would amount to the largest cuts to Medicaid in American history, all to deliver tax cuts for the richest 1%.
And that was just today. Lawmakers on the Hill speaking to the potential impact that the House Republican budget plan may have on Medicaid. It's difficult to connect the dots here, and you want to follow the language very closely because it's not written into these instructions. Lawmakers are simply trying to do the math, figure out where the money is going to come from. And joining us now for the latest on the House budget vote is Bloomberg's Megan Scully. It's great to see you, Megan. We still have a vote scheduled for this evening. Do we think this actually happens?
That's what they say. As of a few minutes ago, the second-ranking Republican in the House said the vote is still on. Of course, it cleared a procedural hurdle just a few hours ago with pretty much all Republicans on board. But that was just the procedural hurdle. So now we will see what happens at 6 p.m. unless it gets pulled at the last minute. The lawmakers to watch are the fiscal conservatives here.
Well, and so I guess that's my question. If this gets pulled, will it try to go to the floor again in the same version, or are they going to have to make revisions, send it back to the Budget Committee to get everybody happy with this?
It will depend a lot on Donald Trump and, whether he's able to persuade all members of the caucus to go along with it. It seems as though several of the lawmakers who were concerned about the Medicaid cuts have been assuaged for now, because as Joe said, this bill does not actually prescribe the cuts. It just refers them to committees. So they're taking kind of a wait and see approach, or at least that was the signal they were sending this afternoon. The ones who have not been assuaged here are the fiscal conservatives, the ones who think this bill doesn't cut enough out of Medicaid and other accounts. And they want to see real deficit cutting. They want to balance the budget, and they want to do it quickly.
So assuming that this goes off tonight, we assume that the Speaker has the votes. Would he bring it to the floor without knowing? We had 3 holdouts the last time we checked.
Yes, potentially 4. Yeah. And we have known Speaker Johnson to go to the floor and lose votes. You would never see that with Nancy Pelosi. But Johnson has done it time and again. He's done it on procedural votes, and he's also done it on legislation. This might be, if he brings it to the floor and it fails, it could be, an effort to smoke out the opposition. Donald Trump, I'm sure he was making calls to several of these lawmakers this afternoon. We saw Representative Burchett walking onto the floor, talking to the president. So it would not be unusual for him to take it to the floor, not knowing full well how it would fare.
All right, Bloomberg's Megan Scully with the latest. Thank you so much. And we want to get more now from a member himself, live from Capitol Hill. Republican Congressman Greg Murphy of North Carolina is joining us. Welcome back to Bloomberg, Congressman. Obviously, you know very well the people we are talking about here. These holdouts are colleagues of yours. With your knowledge of them, do you expect they'll come around this evening?
Well, I think there are 1 or 2 that, regardless of what we do, are not going to come around. But, that's just what we've seen historically from them. And, Kayleigh, this is a blueprint. It's only a blueprint for what we're going to be able to do in reconciliation, send back to the committees. So, I really have an issue with some of the folks who are blocking this at this point in time. This is nothing that is set in stone. We're going to look at $1.5 trillion cuts, hopefully up to $2 trillion. But, we're talking about Medicaid a few minutes ago. If the Biden administration did not explode the Medicaid rolls, these cuts really would not be necessary. But we're going to go on through every single committee and go through certain cuts, but then add $200 billion to our border security, national security, and those type of things, defense. But all at a time when we really need to get off this fiscal cliff. Sadly enough, most folks in the country don't understand the financial peril that we are in that has been brought forth by many presidents, Republican and Democrat. And so we're really here. We need to do something, and we need to move forward. And I think that's what the Speaker is going to do this evening.
We've got a live view of the House floor right now on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube. Steve Scalise breaking out the easel, accusing Democrats of crushing the middle class with new taxes. Of course, presuming the Trump tax cuts are not extended. Congressman, what's going on behind the scenes? Are they holed up in the Speaker's office right now? Is it a matter of adjusting certain numbers? Or like Megan was just telling us, getting Donald Trump on the phone to twist some arms?
Well, I'm not one of the holdouts, so I'm not sure exactly what's going on. But I think the president has been involved in speaking to some of those individuals who are understandably, they can be persuaded that this is just a blueprint to move forward. We have a couple other individuals that there's not enough Jesus in the Bible for them. And so that said, we need to move forward. We need to get these other folks on board so that then we can actually do our work. How this is being done, I think it's in the president's hands because he wants this moved forward.
Well, Congressman, when you focus on the issue of Medicaid specifically, which I know you said this is just a blueprint, Medicaid cuts are not actually prescribed by this legislation. They just very well could ultimately be the result of it if the Energy and Commerce Committee has to find $880 billion of spending cuts. You are not just a congressman. You are a doctor, I believe still a practicing surgeon. Do you have any reservations about that prospect?
Well, I do, but I don't, because let me tell you, during the Biden administration, no state was allowed to go back and audit their Medicaid rolls. Remember, Medicaid is for poor working mothers, for the children under age 18, for the disabled and the elderly poor. Those are the requirements. Those are the eligibility issues for a person to be on Medicaid. They exploded the eligibility for Medicaid during the Biden administration because, and this is people that I see, Kayleigh, these are patients that I see are on Medicaid who I know don't qualify. So going back and taking them off the Medicaid rolls where they really shouldn't be is going to be, as I love to say, a target-rich environment. Going back on some of the other issues where we've exploded the programs and they shouldn't be that way, they were never intended to be that way, I think will do a great bulk of what the cost-cutting measures will be for Medicaid.
Congressman, government runs out of money in just 17 days. We don't even have top lines agreed to yet. Is there enough Jesus in the Bible to avoid a shutdown?
Well, I sure hope so, Joe. I mean, Jesus may need to come down and help out a little bit. You know, that said, I'm not for one for shutting down our government. Some people have the false idea that shutting down the government is a good idea, at least for conservatives, but that's actually the absolute opposite, because we'll end up having to have Democratic votes in the Senate, 60, which will actually make the poison pill a hell of a lot worse. That said, you know, the Speaker's, he's got a lot on his plate right now, budget reconciliation and the CR moving forward. I'm going to make sure some things are done with Medicare payment for physicians, but we need to get that done. The country doesn't need to stop in its tracks with a stop in government.
I'm sure you're well aware, Congressman, of the reports that one of the things the Democrats are looking at as potentially what would be exchanged for their support to keep the government lights on is constraints around the degree to which the Trump administration cannot spend appropriated money that has been appropriated by Congress. Are you fundamentally opposed to that, given that you, as a member of Congress, are bestowed with the powers of the purse as it is? Is it really so bad if you continue to have that role?
Well, Kayleigh, their heads are on fire because they haven't seen looking at his 100 days, he's done more in 100 days than Biden did in 4 years. And so this is a rate of which is truly, you know, we're in gale force winds here. But what the president is doing is he's living up to his campaign promises. And remember, he won not only the Electoral College, but he won the popular vote. This is what the people want. So the Democrats are, you know, running around. They're trying to do literally everything possible to stymie the administration. It's not going to fly. It's really not going to fly.
But a lot of ink has been spilled last couple of days talking about Republicans getting ears full at town hall meetings while home in the district. And we have seen video evidence of some of these. But I wonder your take, what you're hearing. Some Republican voters seem to be very excited about the cuts, but not so excited about the way some of this is being executed or communicated, Congressman.
Yeah,
what do you hear?
Know, Joe, I think that's a fair assessment. You know, when a new CEO comes in on a company, and this is the way I look at Musk, he's coming in on a failing company, which is the country. People don't understand that, but that's what's happening financially, is there's a lot of restructuring involved. And whether it comes in with blunt force or surgical precision really is up to the CEO. I think there are some reservations. Let's be plain and clear about the manner in which it's being done. The end result has to be done. But, you know, again, Republicans are for the most, I think, happy with it. A lot of the Democrats, of course, don't want it because they'd rather spend.
We know, Congressman, you focus on veterans affairs issues as well, and we've seen reports on the number of veterans who have been caught up in the cuts we've seen so far. Has any data on that front been shared with you from the Department of Government Efficiency?
You know, Kayleigh, the Biden administration, by its own admission, overhired in the Veterans Organization, Veterans Administration. And they thought, well, we'll just try to figure it out while they did. And so going back now and cutting out the people that should not have been hired in the first place really is what's happening. You know, so many of these cuts are things that really we're going to have by attrition, or that people really, and I know this for a fact, one of my former staff members is now on a probationary cut because they were cut for being here on a probationary period. They're going to reapply for other jobs that are available. Democrats, again, pushing things out of control. The things that happened in the Veterans Administration is excess, not anything that's going to affect benefits or health care for veterans.
Congressman, it's good to have you back. Republican Congressman Greg Murphy of North Carolina, thanks for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Coming up, President Trump's first cabinet meeting is set for tomorrow, and look who's expected at the table. Elon Musk. Our political panel joins next on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.
Is Elon Musk going to attend the president's first cabinet meeting tomorrow?
He is, as a matter of fact. I spoke to the president about that before coming down here as well. And Elon, considering he is working alongside the president and our cabinet secretaries, this entire administration will be in attendance tomorrow just to talk about DOGE's efforts and how all of the cabinet secretaries are identifying waste, fraud, and abuse at their respective agencies.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt during the briefing earlier today confirming the news. Yeah, Elon Musk attending President Trump's first cabinet meeting tomorrow. Joining us this evening's political panel to get into this and a lot more. Megan Hayes is back at the table, former special assistant to President Biden, our Democratic strategist, alongside Lisa Camuso-Miller, Republican strategist, host of the Friday Reporter podcast. Great to see both of you. Are we clutching pearls here to think that this is some outrageous development that Elon Musk gets to sit at the table, an unconfirmed advisor sharing space with the cabinet?
I mean, I'm not clutching pearls. I'm also not surprised. I will be very interested to see if he also has a chair with his name in the back that he can buy at the end of this. I do think it's a little unprecedented, and I do think it's worrisome of how much power he does have being in this position. Most of the time, special government employees sit backbench as advisors, and they're not sitting at the table. So it'll be interesting to see those dynamics.
But to the point of it not being surprising, is he not already effectively acting as a cabinet secretary, or at the very least, someone who has the power to change the shape of the federal government to this point, Lisa?
He definitely is. I also think it's going to be a very interesting conversation because it sounds like a lot of the secretaries are unhappy with the email that he sent over the weekend asking for their staff to report in about what they've done for the week. So to me, it strikes me that maybe really an interesting conversation to be had. Let's hope we get a little bit of a clip to hear how that goes.
Well, what do you think? Is this, it's being framed by the Washington Post as a rebellion against Elon by the cabinet. Are we at that level?
It's interesting. I mean, I think this is an unfolding conversation. I think a lot of people in town want to know how quickly this is going to all come apart. I mean, I think we can expect, we've watched this show once before. I think it's probably likely to happen. But no, I think the one thing that I'm seeing is that this could be a breach of confidentiality. And the concern is about how a lot of what our government officials are doing, and not just the top officials, but those that are working in the government, are doing some very important and very confidential work that should not be disclosed, certainly over an email to an unregulated organization.
Well, and just to recap how this has gone down so far, Elon Musk posts on X about it. If you don't respond, that's taken as resignation. The Office of Personnel Management then sends out an email asking for these 5 bullets. Pete Hegseth, Kash Patel, as Lisa was alluding to, other department heads say don't worry about responding to the staff. OPM itself tells HR departments it's voluntary. Then Elon Musk comes back and says, actually, no, it's not voluntary. You do have to do this time. Megan, is it actually about the email itself and having to justify your job, or just the chaos surrounding this entire thing?
It is a lot of chaos. I think that's what's troubling to the American people. I don't think the American people necessarily have issues with going in and getting rid of some waste and bloat. Democrat or Republican can probably see that organizing the federal government efficiency is probably a good thing. It's the chaos that it is. And also, Elon Musk is showing that he has power here. And it will be interesting to see who the president backs, because at some point in time, the president's going to have to choose some of his cabinet secretaries, or is he going to choose Elon Musk? So that will be an interesting dynamic that's going to play out.
In the meantime, though, just to continue the story that you're telling here, there is a midnight deadline, right? It went from last night.
Apparently reinstated.
Now it's been reinstated tonight. Donald Trump says he thinks it's a good idea, but every agency is telling their employees not to worry, we'll take care of this for you. So how does this end?
Apparently, 1/3 of the federal workforce has sent an email. Can you imagine that? The volume of emails that have gone through?
The servers are melting.
As someone who was a result of the OPM breach not that long ago in terms of my own privacy and my data, makes me a little concerned to wonder what what kind of information they're going to get access to on the email servers. So, yeah, there's a lot to be worried
careful
about.
who you email in Washington.
Right.
Yeah, I guess so. Certainly there is a lot to unpack with that story. There's a lot to unpack just from today when it comes to the moves from the White House and what we learned at the press briefing specifically when Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, during the briefing, shared the administration's plan to pick and choose reporters in the press pool.
We want to double down and give even greater access to the American people. We want more outlets and new outlets to have a chance to take part in the press pool, to cover this administration's unprecedented achievements up close, front and center.
Now, we should note here, Bloomberg News has been a longtime permanent member of the pool administered by the White House Correspondents Association. But, Megyn, you, of course, were inside the Biden White House. You worked in managing the relationship with the press. What do you make of this decision on the part of this administration?
It's actually very interesting because one thing we were talking about before we got on is the press pool pays for their participation. So they pay for their plane seats, they pay for their seats in the van. There's a lot of finances that are attached to being part of the pool that the press pay for. A lot of these outlets are not able to afford to be part of the pool, and the wires, Reuters, Bloomberg, and AP really hold the lion's share of the cost. And so it will be interesting to see if those other networks are able to pay, and then who is footing the bill for that. Because if the taxpayers are footing the bill, that becomes state-run media. And that is a problem for the American people. They are not getting then an actual unbiased source. And as someone who had to plan these pools, it is a lot of logistics. It is very challenging to make sure that they are with the president every turn. So this is a crucial point for us to understand what's going on with the president and with government in an unbiased way.
You know, it's really interesting. People think being in the press pool is some sort of exotic vacation. It involves a lot of sitting around in vans in the food court at Andrews, waiting for the plane to arrive or the golf match to end. What do you make of all of this? I think we're getting to the point here that it's not sustainable if you kick out legacy media.
No, I think Megyn's point is absolutely one that even someone like myself who's worked with media for over 20 years really didn't realize that there was a part of this that then makes it something that's even more concerning, this state-run piece of it. And the other question I have, too, is that what impact is this having? People generally, the American electorate generally distrust the media. We've seen the polls over and over again. That's not reflective on the work that we're doing here today, talking to the world about what's happening. But it is one that makes me wonder if the electorate is going to care at all about this, because they generally have a dissatisfaction with the way media is conducted. And so that's why there won't be an outcry from people from outside of Washington, D.C. Those of us inside the Beltway will know that this is absolutely not the right direction to go.
What do you think about that, Megyn, that this doesn't really play outside the bubble?
Well, it's really unfortunate because a lot of these outlets like the AP, they really feed the local news sources, and that's where a lot of people do get their news. And the networks also feed out. There's a pool feed that goes out to all of these local news stations, and that is how the American people get their news. So it really will be a disservice to the American people because they will not have an unbiased look of what is happening day to day with the president. And so it's, it is not a good use of taxpayer dollars to be dictating media and what the coverage is for the president.
When we talk about the pool, it's a rotation. For people who don't, there's no reason why anyone would understand this if you weren't in the business. It's a rotation because you can't have 400 reporters in the Oval Office. So one person from each medium gets to report what happened. And it's a very high responsibility to deliver the verbatim, the news that comes from an encounter like that. And all of your colleagues count on it, including the ones who might be replacing you in the pool. Interesting dynamic.
Absolutely, absolutely interesting. The one thing I will say that is really remarkable about the press pool and the White House Press Correspondents Organization and those that actually cover these elected officials is that they have a remarkable dynamic amongst one another. They really do share a remarkable amount of information. They work together well. And I think that if there's anything that I think we can find that will be useful, it's that for the most part, my hope would be that whoever ends up replacing some of these legacy organizations are the ones who then cooperate and figure out how to work together to make sure that the right information is shared with the American people at a time that they need it.
All right, we appreciate the discussion on this. Megyn Hayes and Lisa Camusa Miller, our political panel this evening. Thank you so much. And still ahead, we'll look to this evening's House budget plan floor vote, which may or may not be going ahead. Steve Scalise now won't say when a vote will happen. We'll have more next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
To my colleagues on the right that say the reduction in spending is insufficient, I remind them that by passing this procedural vote today, it's simply a floor, that we can build on the spending and saving reforms. To my colleagues that think it's too much, I would offer them to really look hard and make sure that we're not simply measuring the inputs into some of our key programs, in particular Medicaid, but instead we're measuring the outputs.
Republican Congressman Bryan Steil of Wisconsin with us earlier this hour, who also sounded confident about a House budget resolution vote happening tonight. But the number 2 Republican in the chamber not sounding so sure, now signaling to reporters that he doesn't know when a vote will happen, saying we're obviously still talking to people. So, Joe, it's a matter of getting the holdouts in line, knowing right now there are too many holdouts to actually get this thing across.
You can lose one. It seems that the speaker is down 4 right now, at least, based on our most recent reporting, with meetings continuing. That could be a fluid number, but to get this done tonight could be a tall order. We may be talking about this when we get back together here tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll keep our eye on the House floor in the meantime. But yes, we will have more coverage for you tomorrow, as well as in the Washington Edition newsletter you can find on the terminal or online.
Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg. We'll see you back here tomorrow.